Hey guys, we are going to be covering notes 8.1 today, which is going to be an introduction into the process of photosynthesis. So since we've already talked about cellular respiration in depth, the study of photosynthesis should be a little bit simpler. Just keep in mind that together, photosynthesis and cell respiration are the way that all living things get carbon and get the energy necessary to sustain homeostasis and to grow and reproduce and do all the things that living things do. So in sections 2 and 3, we'll dig in a little bit deeper to the two parts of photosynthesis, which are the light reactions and the dark reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle. So just keep in mind that photosynthesis is the primary way that energy is captured and enters the biosphere. So photosynthesis is obviously driven by light that comes from the sun, and indirectly or directly, it nourishes the entire living world. The exception would be some of the chemosynthetic habitats at the very bottom of the ocean, for example. But many of those bottom dwelling organisms actually feed on waste or dead material that floats down from surface type ecosystems. So photosynthesis is this process used primarily by plants, but also by algae, by protists that are photosynthetic, and some photosynthetic bacteria. Bacteria that do photosynthesis do it just in their cytosol because they don't have chloroplasts. So you don't necessarily need chloroplasts to do photosynthesis, but it does make it a lot easier. And most organisms on Earth that do photosynthesis do so in a chloroplast. So all of these creatures that we mentioned are considered autotrophs because they feed themselves just using ingredients from their environment. Most of these autotrophs are also photoautotrophs, meaning that they use sunlight as the activation energy to jumpstart the whole process. The first autotrophs were seen more than 2 billion years ago in the fossil record. And remember that most of the oxygen that we breathe day after day comes from this process of photosynthesis. It is a byproduct, but an extremely useful one. In modern times, we use the fossil fuels that are actually stored plants and animals from the time of the dinosaurs. That is also stored photosynthetic energy because it was assimilated into plants. Those plants died, became fossilized into the coal, oil, and natural gas that we use to power our lives every day. So we can think of these fossil fuels as solar energy from the time of the dinosaurs. Nowadays, we're trying to find more effective and efficient ways to store solar energy. This is a picture of an algae farm that is these basically plastic bags of algae doing photosynthesis, and then that energy can be harvested and used to power, an electric plant or something like that. But all types of energy initially came from the sun, whether it is directly using solar energy, wind energy. The exception, I suppose, would be geothermal. Geothermal energy comes from the Earth's core, but most all sources of energy, both renewable and non-renewable, originally came from the sun. So keep in mind there's lots of different types of organisms that can do photosynthesis. It's not just plants, although they're the most obvious ones. We have many aquatic autotrophs as well. Bacteria can do this. There's lots of different organisms that are in that bottom trophic level and the base of the food chain. So if an organism is not an autotroph, then it is a heterotroph. Heterotroph means it is feeding on other organisms, so that includes us as humans. And besides depending on photoautotrophs for food, we also depend on them for the oxygen we need to do cellular respiration. Other kingdoms that join us as being heterotrophs include fungi, some protists, the animal-like protists, and all the bacteria that are not autotrophic. Okay, so today's topic is just to give you an overview of photosynthesis as a process. Keep in mind that most modern eukaryotes that do photosynthesis do so using the chloroplast. And in Unit 1, we discussed how the chloroplast and the mitochondria likely evolved by serial endosymbiosis, that some type of ancient eukaryote engulfed a prokaryotic organism, in this case a photosynthetic one, and instead of digesting it as food, it began to live inside of its host in a form of mutualism. So this chloroplast has many of the same evidence that we see in mitochondria, that it has a double membrane, it has its own intracellular structure, kind of. It has its own DNA, it can spontaneously divide without the rest of the cell dividing. So we know that inside the chloroplast, the organization of molecules and of structures and enzymes is such that it is very, very efficient. So the chlorophyll is the pigment that is going to harvest the energy from sun, and we'll pass it on to the next step. The portion or the tissue inside of the leaf where this process happens is called the mesophyll. We'll see a cross-section of a leaf in just a second. The stomata is an important part of the leaf. It allows for gas exchange. The plant needs to take in CO2 from the environment, but also to give off oxygen in order to be able to do the process of photosynthesis. Thylakoids are these discs that contain the chlorophyll and all the enzymes necessary for carbon capture. And then the stroma is the dense interior fluid where all the enzymes are. We also see kind of an organization within the thylakoids, that they are stacked in these stacks that we call grana. So here we see a cross section of a leaf. Most broad leaves, like we see falling from the trees this time of year, are very thin, but they still contain several layers of cells. Most of the chloroplasts are densely packed at the sunny side of the leaf. So this is the top of the leaf. And then the bottom of the leaf has these little pores. These pores are where gas exchange occurs. So you see CO2 coming in, oxygen going out. You can see the veins of the leaf that are providing water and salt and other nutrients for the plant to sustain photosynthesis. And then the mesophyll is just the spongy, airy tissue that makes the middle part of the leaf. So if we zoom in closer to an individual chloroplast, you can see that these stacks of green discs, they're green because that's what the chlorophyll is. We call each individual disc a thylakoid. A stack of them is called a granum, plural grana. And you can see the double membrane. We have the thylakoid space deep inside those discs, and then the stroma is surrounding the rest of the space inside that's not inside the thylakoid. So you can see a model here at the top. You can see a scanning electron micrograph of that chloroplast at the bottom. So if we go back to the previous slide, there are probably hundreds of individual chloroplasts inside every cell of the plant. You can see that the cells are here and the chloroplasts are the little green dots. So there are many, many chloroplasts within each individual cell. Okay, so hopefully this chemical reaction looks familiar. Photosynthesis is this complex series of reactions, but it can be summarized by the equation below. One thing you might notice is that we have water on both sides. 12 waters come in as a reactant. We actually give off 6 as a product. So oftentimes, like in life science in middle school, you don't have this water coming off as a product, because when you balance this equation, you just say that 6 come in and no go out, when in reality, water is both a reactant and a product. So just keep in mind that energy is electrons. Electrons form bonds and it can store energy. So this is the reverse reaction of cell respiration in all ways. Okay, so if you go to the back of your notes packet, where we had that picture of cell respiration, you will see another picture of photosynthesis. So I do want you to copy this information down so you can kind of have it to refer to. We will talk about each half of this equation more in depth in sections 2 and 3. The first process, we can see light hitting those thylakoids. Water is also a reactant in these light reactions. The only product here is oxygen, and then 2 energetic molecules that we call ATP, should sound familiar, and NADPH. This is a cousin of NAD and FAD from cellular respiration, so think of it as an energy shuttle. These 2 energetic molecules will fuel the Calvin cycle, where carbon dioxide is assimilated from the environment and is turned into sugar. Usually we talk about glucose, but technically it could be any simple sugar. Even some complex carbohydrates can be made by this process. And after we strip the energy from ATP and NADPH, they are then recycled and reused back in the light reactions. Okay, so that is the end of the notes for section 1. If you want to get more information, you can check out the crash course photosynthesis video. I'll put the link right here at the end for you. And feel free to text me on Remind or send me messages on Schoology or email if you have any other specific questions.